This is Tim Congdon of the Institute of International Monetary Research with the monthly update on monetary trends around the world. I usually have a theme in these presentations, and the theme this month is the Eurozone and its challenges, prospects and promises. Just had the election of a new French president. We have the prospect of a general election in Italy before May of next year, and there are various signs of rumbles of a crisis coming through again with Greek debt. So there's a number of things to talk about here. President Macron is known for his strongly pro-European tendencies. He's strongly in favour of greater European integration, and he wants the Franco-German engine, the understanding between France and Germany, to restore the process of European integration, even if there are problems in the Eurozone and even if Britain is leaving the European Union altogether. And so he is proposing that there should be a European finance ministry, and on that basis, European taxes, European expenditure, and also critically, perhaps European public debt. Not public debt in the name of the individual European nations, but actually public debt of the European Union as a whole. You might call this, to a degree, debt mutualization. In America, of course, there are the states, they have their own debt, their own finances, and then there's a federal government, and the federal government certainly issues debt, and it certainly has its own expenditure. So why couldn't this also emerge in the European Union? Associated with that are recommendations for a European banking union, which means, for example, that such things as deposit insurance would become common over the whole of the Eurozone. Same levels of deposit insurance, same compensation arrangements, common fund to pay anybody who's lost money on their deposits, and so on. Now, these ideas have been around some time. They're recommended in something called the Five Presidents Report a year or two ago. And the Germans so far have been very reluctant to go down the path of debt mutualization and of a banking union, except in a number of relatively peripheral details. What they're afraid is that if they, as the wealthiest large nation in the European Union with the strongest public finances, if they enter into this agreement with other European countries, they may have to pay up and be poorer and have to pay up the debts on the debts of other countries. What I want to show in the next few minutes is that, frankly, President Macron is whistling in the wind if he expects to make much progress on this front in the next 18 months or so, and certainly it's very unlikely anything much going to happen before the Italian general election about this time next year. Let's just have a look at the contrast here between the levels of public debt relative to national income for Italy and Germany. Of the large countries, these are the extreme cases. You can see at the start the single currency, Italy already had much larger debt relative to GDP than Germany. In the crisis, the debt to GDP ratio rose. In the German case, they've come back down again. In the Italian case, they're reaching new peaks. In fact, in the Italian case, the ratio of public debt to GDP is roughly twice that in Germany. If you're a German taxpayer, why would you want to get mixed up in a debt union with Italy? What about France? France sees itself very much as the associate and partner of Germany in the process of European integration, or at least the German and French elites do, and the French elite certainly does. So this is the first decade or so of the single currency. You can see the ratio of public debt to GDP roughly going sideways, roughly constant, perhaps rising a little bit, but towards 2010, the crisis period, but much the same in both France and Germany. Fine, so they really are associates and partners, aren't they? Well, then let's extend the chart to today, and you can see that in France the ratio of public debt to GDP has risen quite a bit, and in Germany it's gone down. So again, if you're a German taxpayer, why would you want to get into a debt union with France, even with France? And then of course we know in the background there are the problems with the excessive public debt and other problems, banking problems, in the Club Med countries, the Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, Spain, so-called peaks, that set the Eurozone, particularly in the crisis period 6 or 7 years ago. In the worst phase of the crisis, in the period 2009 to 2013, the ratio of public debt to GDP rose sharply in these three countries here. You can see the picture for Portugal, Ireland, and at the top, Greece. Okay. And again, you might say that to some extent these nations all have had the same kind of experience. It's true that in Greece the debt is higher relative to GDP than the other two nations, but at the end in particular they're all running away, they've all got these problems, all those three nations' concerns about possible national bankruptcy and... Okay. Well, the Greeks have throughout their period in the single currency been receiving aid from other members of the Eurozone and the EU, and since 2010, when the crisis really hit, they have had debt relief, they have had a major default where they just simply didn't pay bondholders, but yet despite all that they've just gone from crisis to crisis, and they're still having another crisis in prospect this summer. And you might say, surely there's a case for debt forgiveness. You know, there's this rock star, ex-Greek finance minister, Yanis Varoufakis, who's very lucid, very eloquent, very stylish, you know, pop star economist, who writes books saying Greece should be forgiven its debts. Well, as I said, Greece, Ireland, Portugal, to some extent in the same boat 4 or 5 years ago. What's happened to them since? You can see the Irish have got on top of their problems. The ratio of public debt to GDP has fallen very sharply, very impressively in many ways. The Portuguese have at least stabilised the situation. Things getting better there. There is a recovery, economic recovery. And what about Greece? No, the ratio of debt to GDP, despite the debt relief, despite the crisis provision, despite the low-cost finance from other governments, no, there still is a crisis. And the problem that the Eurozone has got is that they can't treat nations differently. You can't expect the Irish and the Portuguese to do everything they can to honour their debts, while Greece fails to do so. And I quite agree that in many ways the Greek external debt situation, public debt situation, is untenable. I'm sorry, if you in Greece have been lying about the size of your debts, failing to honour your commitments to other countries, you've broken the rules. And I'm sorry, the logic of this system, if you want to belong to it, is you have to obey the rules. Will Greece then leave the system? Well, I don't know. All I know is that between now and Italian elections, this subject will be in the news, and it means that the Eurozone will not make the kind of progress towards greater integration that President Macron wants. There's one further aspect of this which needs to be highlighted. The figures I've shown you up to now are about the ratio of public debt to national output for all these nations. But the banking systems have got debt, they've got deposits, of course, to everyone, to people, companies, financial institutions, and so on in the various countries, and of course also to external deposits, deposits in other countries. And then there are international payments. And then, French banks when they have a deficit, might borrow in the interbank market from German banks, from Swiss banks, British banks might borrow, Italian banks might borrow, and so on. Now in the Eurozone, these debits and credits between banks are registered in something called a Target 2 clearing system. In the early years of the single currency, the debit and credit balances of the different nations' banking systems was a technical subject. They weren't very big. They got very big in the crisis itself, 2011-2012. Then they eased a bit, helped by Draghi's bazooka, the huge loans from the European Central Bank. And now look at this chart, you can see that again, they've moved out dramatically for the big destinations in recent quarters. Italy has its largest borrowings, Italian banks its largest borrowings from Target 2 since the beginning of the single currency, and Germany the largest credit position. Now if the banks go bust, either depositors don't receive the money to some degree, as happened in Cyprus, by the way, 2 or 3 years ago, or the governments have got to pick up the tab to make sure depositors are paid in full. That's how the modern world works. So, implicitly in this chart, there is further indebtedness for Italy against Germany. Okay? As you can see, the numbers have been slipping away month by month in the last year or so. Beppe Grillo, the leader of the Five Star Movement, wants Italy out of the Eurozone. I don't know how this is going to play out in the next 6 months, year. I don't know when the Italian general election is going to be. All I would say is that President Macron is whistling in the wind if he expects further European integration, further currency integration in Europe in the up until the middle of next year. There's a lot more to say about the money trends in different countries. I'm running out of time. All I would say is that there has been some recovery in US money growth in the last couple of months, and as before, I expect globally 2017 to be a fairly stable year, and as of now I can't see why early 2018 should be very different, despite all the alarm about Greece, possibly about Italy, and the worries of the Eurozone. Thank you very much.